Hello, everyone. I'm Sam Eckmann of Gold Derby, and I am sitting here with Lizzie Yianni-Georgiou, the makeup and hair designer of Last Night in Soho, Edgar Wright's latest film. And Lizzie, the main feature of this film, in terms of looks for your makeup and hair is Sandy, Anya Taylor-Joy. Her look becomes such a guiding force for Thomasin McKenzie's character, Eloise. And so because Eloise is a fashion designer herself and becomes obsessed with her look. So I'm wondering, what was the process like in terms of actually centering and finding this look for Anya?
Well, I can't lie. When I first got in to meet with Edgar, he had very sort of distinct ideas of what he wanted. And even in the script, it said she was a platinum blonde. So I knew that we had to get that hair color. And also I already knew, because it was slightly, the story was horror defined as well, and who, with who was going to actually shoot it. Shang, I knew that we'd be in quite a lot of dark red lights and sort of mystical, sort of weird happenings going on. So I knew it had to be this really strong white blonde. That's what I was desperate to get, and Edgar very much agreed with that. We did base quite a lot of that look on the young Brigitte Bardot, who's so iconic, but we did watch so many other 1950s and 60s movies to sort of get our inspiration from there. I mean, Edgar and his editor Paul put together a 15-minute sort of movie of all these different clips from different films of ideas that he kind of really wanted to sort of pull through. And so Odile and I both got to see those. Odile, the costume designer, both got to have a look at those before we started to play with anything. But then I mean, my first search was to find any higher wigs in that kind of really light natural blonde to try and, I mean, of course, Bardot wasn't a natural blonde. She was very much a bleach blonde, but I wanted it to look very much like a natural blonde, and I wanted to get this lovely texture on the hair. So, that was one of the first things that I kind of put together a mood board with, even before at my interview for Edgar, I came down with that. So that was something that just stuck in my head the minute I read the script.
Yeah, I imagine what might have been difficult for it, at least from my perspective, is that it's a look that sort of has to live on Anya, and then Eloise, Thomasin McKenzie, also takes it on. Was it difficult to design a sort of look that had to adapt to actresses?
Yes, it was, and very much so. When I first met the two actresses, they're so different in themselves, which is great for the parts because they are such different characters in the parts. One is very confident and very sort of out there, even as an actor, as a person that you meet on the street. She, Anya's very sort of together and sort of very grown up. And then we had Thomasin, who hadn't done a period production before, who hadn't worn wigs before, whereas Anya had kind of been through that before. So it was that thing of getting the two girls and finding something that would work for both and making it work on both of the different sort of faces and shape that, the shape of the head is different, and also the different in the Anya lives in the 60s. So we kind of decided that we would keep that hairstyle and that makeup very much in the 60s. So we used products that kind of fitted that era, and especially rollers, and the way that we dried the hair and the way we styled the hair with the back combing and all of that. We made that very 60s, and then I just decided that in order to make it work for Thomasin, we would make that slightly more modern and use more modern techniques to do her hair, because even if she'd gone to a salon to tint her hair, it'll be a completely different method then than it is now. So I wanted to make that. I'm quite method in the way that I work, so I made that method work for us so that we could make the actresses feel comfortable with it and feel like they were from the different eras, very much so, along with the costume design, of course, and the sets and everything else. But it was it was very conscious. It was a conscious thing to do, to sort of try and sort of show the slight differences that would happen. So we didn't make them look exactly the same, but they still mirrored each other. So it kind of, it worked, thank God.
Yeah, it definitely worked. You mentioned something there about utilizing the shapes of their face, and I was wondering, when you're coming up with a design, if you could just walk us through, like, how long is the process of taking into account your ideas and mixing that with an actor's face? Because like Anya has these already very distinctive eyes, and you've given her these really dramatic eye makeup. So what is that process like of thinking about something and moving to adapt it to the actor?
Well, I think because I've been doing it for a long time, I do it without thinking. But if I have to think about it, it's quite, I usually study the actress when I first meet her, so she'll catch me staring at her. So when we first meet them, it's not that kind of thing. I was like, hi, and not really looking at her. I'll just look at the way they move and use their eyes, use their lips, and how much they touch their face and everything, because that always makes a difference to me. I don't know about other makeup artists, but to me, I always consider if they're very, very touchy-feely on their faces, I need a base that's going to sort of last a bit longer and not ruin very quickly. And if somebody doesn't really touch their face, I can use something a bit sort of lighter. So I take all of that into account from the minute I've met them. And then I go away and have a look at different images from different eras, or any inspiration that I've already pulled, to see which might work with that actor and which might not. Because I met Edgar quite far ahead, and he already knew which actresses he wanted, but I'd never worked with them before. So I went away and sort of had a look at what they'd done before, and sort of studied those faces before I even got them in the room. And luckily, because Anya was already working on another project with Working Title, we managed to get Anya and Thomasin together about 4 or 5 days, I think, or nearly 2 weeks in the end, way before we got any of the other actors, where Odile and I could play with the costume and the different hairstyles and different color blondes, and all of that was going into it. So, I mean, this particular look took at least 2 weeks really to sort of go, right, that's going to work with both of these girls, and then offer it up to Edgar, because all the different blondes, don't necessarily work on both actors. So then you have to change the skin tones, and there was all that going on. So, it can take a month really of thinking about it and trying different things. And if you've got that, that's great. But so many times on sort of smaller budget films, and this wasn't a huge budget movie, on smaller budget films, you don't even get the actor until like 3 days before you're going to shoot on them, and then you're in trouble really, because you've got to try and make that work before you've even tried it that well on them. And Anya did go through quite a lot of change as well, which was quite subtle, but in the makeup chair it didn't look quite as subtle, because obviously as her character deteriorates and doesn't like being in the job that she's actually in rather than the job she dreamed of doing, she starts to break down, and that doesn't come across as much in the film because of the dark lighting and everything, but we still had to sort of do it and make it a part of her, her journey. Same with Thomasin. We start off with this lovely clean schoolgirl, college girl, and sort of who's been playing with makeup obviously because she's into fashion and she's into movies, with all the Audrey Hepburn Breakfast at Tiffany on her on her bedroom wall, and the way that she's designed that paper dress to get into college, to sort of being in the center of London and taking all of that in, and then starting to sort of take on the Sandy persona. So she had quite a journey from that to then sort of starting to feel like it was taking over her life and she couldn't cope with it, and then going to the Halloween party with that Halloween makeup, never really getting herself together enough to wash that away completely.
Yeah.
A lot of, both of those characters showed a lot in their makeup, and it was a lot, it was a lot to think about and fit in, and also make sure that all the cuts and everything we were making were going to work. And Edgar works so closely on the cuts and the timing and everything. It was quite a sort of challenge to sort of keep up with that.
Yeah. I was wondering how much of Thomasin's Halloween makeup was sort of in the script and what your design was, because it's a great effect, starting with a full mask of, costume makeup, and that melts away as she sort of mentally unravels.
Well, I think when I first read the script, I didn't sort of read it like that. But then as we sort of went further into the script and sort of started working with Edgar and watching some of the rehearsals and everything, you knew that, it was all practically in one day. And then she sleeps in it for the night after Halloween and gets up and doesn't really get herself together. And I loved some of that imagery. And I was very sort of, determined that it would sort of stay with us. And also it really helped to show how badly affected she was by it all. So it was part of the story, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But it became even more so, I think, part of the story, because once you saw that makeup on her, I mean, would she have had time to sort of clean herself off the night before, as she was in such a state, and she'd seen everyone being slashed and sort of killed in that room. And it was really great, actually, to be able to keep that and take that on board. And I think it helps the audience feel her pain, doesn't it? Feel the sort of stress and the strain that she was under, to sort of find out who this Sandy was and how she died, and try and sort of get justice, I guess.
Sure. Yeah. You mentioned the lighting before too, and so much of Edgar has a very specific look to his films, I think, and this movie really delves into surrealism as we dive back and forth. She gets lost in the 60s. How do you what is the collaboration process like in terms of taking into account the entire look of the film to make sure your makeup's going to match?
I always do that. I always get to know the, I think it's really important to get to know who your DOP is going to be and how they kind of, want to process it, and how they're going to, how they're going to light it, not only how the director sees it, but I guess they've had a lot more contact than we've, before we get on board, or they're on board sooner. So they get to sort of talk his ideas through with them. So it's about getting inside both of their heads, isn't it? It's getting inside Edgar's head and getting inside the DOP's head, so that you're on the same page, along with the costume designer and because the set designer as well. I always go and visit, their department and find out what colors they're using, how sort of, what that's going to feel from that angle, because that helps me then decide where my people are going to go, where my actors are going to go. Are they going to be really pristine? Are they going to be slightly shabby? Are they going to be, it kind of really helps to sort of make it all gel together. Mm-hmm. And I'd watched quite a few of Edgar's films, where I'd also watched Chang's films as well, and Chang's films, and I knew that he used a lot of sort of the red lighting and the sort of, it was handheld cameras and all sorts going on, and I was very excited by that. So I wanted us to be a part of that, and so that's why the hair had to be that really pale color, because then it stood out in those lights, and the sort of skin tones are quite sort of pale. And then obviously when the punters start to get murdered, we picked a red blood that was very, very similar to the 1970s and 1960s movies, which was like a really, really sort of bright orange red rather than a deep red, so that would pick up well in those situations. So and even with the shadow men, the color of the shadow men was very, very it was very thought out, and we did manage to test them as well. So we've got a specific color and an ink made for that would stay on in the rain as well, because we shot in the rain such a lot, rain that we purposely put there, as well as London rain that kind of came along. So all of it was, it was very thought out.
Yeah.
it wasn't, nothing was really an accident because I think Edgar's so specific about what he wants. And so it was very interesting to try and get inside his head and then present the things that I thought he was asking for and tweak them if they weren't quite right. But that's what I love about our job, is it's not just painting a face and making it pretty. It's about sort of telling that story and sort of getting inside the director and the writer's head to sort of see, where it's actually coming from. I love all of that side of it, because, the Shadow Men started off with, we don't want to see much of their face, their eyes and their mouths need to disappear, and they need to be 1960s, but so it kind of came about that we'd be painting their skins out so that they would look more shadowy, and then Edgar was like, I need to lose their eyes more. So it then became like little covers that we put on their eyes that we'd used on the mummy before, made out of lint. And he kind of said, let's have a look at it if we go that step further. So I called in Barry Gower to come in and do some sort of prosthetic pieces. So we had to take casts of every one of the 13 shadow punters they were at the time. We had to take casts of their faces, and then he made some little pieces that kind of went over the eyes, but that meant that we then had to take the eyebrows out and then put in fake eyebrows, and same with anyone that had a moustache. We had to sort of replace that, and then the mouths had to be sort of taken out. So we started off with taking out the eyes, then we ended up taking out the whole of the mouth, and they had one little slit, and when they were in the makeup they could only really drink their food. They had to have like shakes made for them, and they had to have people sort of walking around guiding them as well. So you can imagine what that was like in Soho with everybody still around. It wasn't sort of lockdown. There was, busy Soho, us and 12, 13 shadow men walking around. So they weren't, I don't know if it's that clear to people when they watch the movie how much work went into them, because they have got they have got been to visual effects as well, and they have kind of lost them a little bit, but we did actually have to take out their eyes and take out their mouths and paint them complete, even when they were in their underpants, we painted them their whole bodies completely grey, and then put the slashes of colour of the blood and all of that. So there was a lot, there's a lot of work in it.
Absolutely. Well, I wanted to ask you quick before I have to let you go, because looking at your resume, you've worked in seemingly every genre, from things like this with Last Night in Soho, where there's some more realistic makeup, to you're Oscar nominated for Guardians of the Galaxy, which is full body makeup and prosthetics. Is there something that you haven't tackled yet, a genre or a style that you're dying to do? It seems like you've done most of them.
I've been so lucky, haven't I? I've had such great directors to work with, and such great stories and projects where I've been allowed to play and sort of, I developed colors and different things, and different methods of doing stuff. So I've been so lucky, and I just want to carry on doing that. Really, there isn't one, is there? There isn't a genre that I haven't really done, but I do love doing the horror, because I love getting inside people's heads.
Well, that's a great one. We'll look forward to the next horror one you tackle. It was amazing work on Last Night in Soho. So thank you. Everyone who's out. Yes, I enjoyed it immensely. Very creepy, and can't wait to watch it again. So
thank you
everyone
so much.
Who's out there watching, make sure you subscribe to Gold Derby. Keep in touch with us throughout the season. And Lizzie, thank you so much for joining me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you too. Take care.